The bold and the beautiful. Feelings frequently explode when secrets collide with love, treason, and ambition. The moment that stunned everyone began on a quiet autumn at Forrester Creations. The halls of the fashion conglomerate felt surprisingly still, but underneath that calm face, a storm was erecting that would soon erupt between Electra Forrester and Dylan. For weeks, whispers had circulated through the company about Dylan's unforeseen rise and her mysterious closeness to Will Spencer. Electra had tried to ignore the rumors at first. She told herself she trusted the people around her, especially Will. Yet the uneasy feeling in her casket no way faded. It dallied every time she saw Dylan laughing with Will in the design office, every time she noticed how snappily their exchanges stopped when she entered the room. What Electra didn't realize was that fate was guiding her toward a battle that would come one of the most indelible moments in recent Forrester history. That autumn, Electra walked into the plant carrying a brochure of new design sketches. She had spent the morning pouring her energy into work, trying to distract herself from the growing dubitation she felt. When she stepped into the main design room, she noticed Dylan standing near Will's office. The two were nearer than usual, speaking in hushed voices. Electra broke near the doorway, unnoticed for a moment, and commodity about the pressure between them incontinently caught her attention. Dylan looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if upset someone might hear. Will sounded inversely uneasy. Electra's heart began to fight. She took a many way forward, and the bottom creaked vocally beneath her heels. Both of them turned incontinently. The look on their faces verified Electra's worst fears. Dylan's eyes widened, and Will tried to speak first, but the words no way came out duly. Electra felt the air grow heavy as silence filled the room. Electra, this isn't what it looks like, Will eventually said, though his voice carried little confidence. Electra looked from him to Dylan and back again. Her mind contended with possibilities, none of them good. She flashed back every strange moment from the once many weeks, every awkward pause, every suspicious regard. Suddenly it all sounded to make sense. Dylan stepped forward cautiously, raising her hands slightly as if trying to calm the situation before it escalated. Electra, please just hear, Dylan said vocally. But that single judgment was enough to enkindle the wrathfulness that Electra had been suppressing for days. Hear? Electra repeated, her voice pulsing with unbelief. You want me to hear now? Her eyes flashed with hurt and fury. The battle snappily drew attention from near staff members. Sidekicks and contrivers glanced toward the growing argument, seeing commodity dramatic was unfolding. But none of them dared step closer. Everyone at Forrester Creations knew better than to intrude a family conflict. Electra stepped directly in front of Dylan now, her posture rigid and commanding. I trusted you, Electra said still, though the emotion in her voice made the words feel louder than any cry. Dylan opened her mouth to respond, but vacillation stopped her. That moment of silence only fueled Electra's wrathfulness further. She interpreted it as guilt. You suppose you can just walk in then and play games with my life, Electra demanded. Dylan shook her head snappily. That's not what I'm doing, she claimed, though her voice cracked under pressure. Will tried to intermediate. Electra, please calm down, he said, stepping between them slightly. But Electra's tolerance had formally shattered. She turned sprucely toward him. Stay out of this, she snapped. Will incontinently stepped back, realizing the situation had passed the point of easy resolution. Dylan swallowed nervously and tried again. Electra, there's commodity you do'n't understand, she began. But before she could finish, Electra raised her hand. The poke echoed through the design room like a blast. Gasps spread among the workers watching from a distance. Dylan staggered slightly from the unforeseen impact, her hand artificially touching her impertinence where the sting burned. For many seconds, nothing spoke. Indeed, the background noise of the office sounded to vanish. Dylan's eyes filled with shock, not only from the poke but from the intensity of Electra's feelings. Electra herself looked shortly surprised by what she had done, yet the wrathfulness in her expression remained strong. The pressure in the room was nearly unsupportable. Eventually, Dylan lifted her head sluggishly and looked directly into Electra's eyes. You had no right to do that, she said still. However, there was pain behind the words. Electra's breathing was heavy, but she didn't back down. Rather, she leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping into a cold wave, controlled tone. Also came the moment that would echo through exchanges each over Los Angeles and among suckers of the bold and the beautiful. Electra goggled straight at Dylan and spoke four nipping words: "Stay down from Will." The judgment was simple, yet the meaning behind it carried enormous weight. Everyone in the room understood incontinently that this wasn't just a warning, it was a protestation of war. Dylan blinked sluggishly, absorbing the communication. For the first time since the battle began, the nervous query in her expression shifted into commodity differently. Determination. "Is that what this is about?" Dylan asked precisely. "You suppose I'm trying to steal him?" Electra didn't answer right down, but her silence spoke volumes. Will looked hugely uncomfortable, trapped between two women whose conflict centered around him. Dylan exhaled sluggishly, trying to recapture countenance. "Electra, you don't know the whole story," she said. "There's more passing than you realize." Electra crossed her arms. "Also explain it," she replied sprucely. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks enough clear." The watching workers changed quiet whispers now. They had seen dramatic moments at Forrester Creations before, but this one felt particularly violent. Dylan dithered again, easily mooting whether to reveal commodity important. Will's eyes widened slightly as if he stressed what she might say coming. Electra noticed that response incontinently. "What's it?" she demanded. "What aren't you telling me?" The pressure in the room grew indeed heavier. Dylan looked from Electra to Will and back again. "I didn't want it to come out like this," she admitted. "But if you're going to charge me, also perhaps you earn the verity." Electra's jaw tensed. "I'm staying," she said forcefully. For a moment Dylan looked nearly sympathetic, as though she rued what was about to be. "Will asked me for help," she revealed. "Not the way you suppose. His planning commodity that involves you." Electra lowered, confusion briefly replacing her wrathfulness. "Planning what?" she asked. Will rubbed his forepart nervously. "Dylan," he advised still, but Dylan continued anyway. "He's been trying to organize a surprise for you," she said. "Commodity big. That's why we've been meeting and talking so much." The room fell silent again as Electra reused the statement. Her earlier certainty suddenly felt less solid. But the demotion of the poke and the emotional explosion couldn't be undone so fluently. Electra looked at Will. "Is that true?" she asked sluggishly. Will jounced awkwardly. "I wanted it to be perfect," he admitted. "I asked Dylan to help because she knows the assiduity connections." Electra's expression softened slightly, but the damage had formally been done. Dylan still stood there with a red mark on her impertinence. The pressure between them hadn't faded. It had simply converted. Electra lowered her aspect. Compactly, scuffling with the admixture of guilt, pride, and moping dubitation. Indeed, if Dylan's explanation was true, the emotional crack Electra felt hadn't dissolved. "Perhaps you should have told me sooner," she said still. Dylan soughed. "Perhaps you should have asked before hitting me," she replied, not unkindly but with unmistakable honesty. The spectators sluggishly returned to their work, seeing the explosive peak of the battle had passed. Yet everyone knew the consequences would ripple through connections at Forrester Creations for days, maybe weeks to come. As Electra eventually turned to leave the room, she broke near the door and glanced back formally more at Dylan. Despite the embarrassment and confusion swirling inside her, the warning she had delivered still held meaning. Because in the complicated world of the bold and the beautiful, trust can shatter in seconds, love can enkindle fierce battles, and occasionally four simple words, "Stay down from Will," can change everything. The poke might fade, the explanation might soften the verity, but the emotional scars from that battle would continue shaping the story of Electra, Dylan, and Will long after that dramatic autumn ended. The battle between Electra Forrester and Dylan inside the halls of the bold and the beautiful didn't simply end after those four explosive words were spoken. In fact, that moment was only the morning of a far deeper emotional storm that would spread through the entire Forrester circle. As Electra stepped out of the design room, the echo of the poke still sounded to hang in the air. Workers pretended to concentrate on their work, but their minds were buzzing with the same question: what had really happened between Electra and Dylan, and how would it affect Will Spencer? Electra walked snappily down the hallway, her heart pounding harder with every step. At first, wrathfulness had fueled her conduct, but now another feeling crept in, mistrustfulness. Dylan's explanation about helping Will plan commodity had shaken her confidence in her own judgment. Still, Electra wasn't ready to admit she might have been wrong. Her pride wouldn't allow it, at least not yet. She pushed open the door to a private office and closed it behind her, eventually letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Meanwhile, back in the design plant, the pressure remained thick. Dylan stood still beside the office, touching her impertinence again where the sting from Electra's hand dallied. It wasn't just the physical pain that bothered her. It was the demotion of being slighted in front of everyone. Will stepped closer, easily feeling responsible for the chaos. "Dylan, I'm really sorry," he said unfeignedly. "I should have handled this better." Dylan looked at him, her expression a blend of frustration and understanding. "You suppose?" she replied with a faint, ironic smile. "Your secret surprise just turned into a public drama." Will ran his hand through his hair, easily overwhelmed. "I didn't suppose Electra would reply like that," he admitted. Dylan soughed. "You don't know her as well as you suppose, also. She cares about you a lot. And when people watch that deeply, covetousness can show up presto." Will jounced sluggishly, knowing she was right. The verity was, he'd undervalued how violent Electra's feelings could be. Not far down, whispers were formally spreading through the structure. Sidekicks changed ganders, contrivers leaned near to each other, and rumors began to grow in the way they always did at Forrester Creations. Some people believed Electra had fully overreacted. Others felt Dylan had been acting distrustfully for weeks and might have merited the battle. In the glamorous but competitive world of the company, drama was nearly as common as fashion sketches. Inside the office where Electra had retreated, she stood near the window looking out over Los Angeles. Her reflection in the glass showed the conflict in her eyes. She replayed the moment again and again in her mind, Dylan's shocked face, the sound of the poke, the silence that followed. And also those 4 words she had spoken so coldly, "Stay down from Will." At the time, it had felt important, like reclaiming control of a situation that was slipping down. But now the memory felt heavier. A knock intruded her studies. Before she could answer, the door opened sluggishly and Will stepped outside. Electra turned toward him incontinently, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" she asked. Will didn't respond right down. Rather, he walked further into the room, choosing his words precisely. "I want to understand what just happened out there," he said calmly. Electra crossed her arms. "You formally know what happened," she replied. "I saw the 2 of you brooding and sneaking around. What did you anticipate me to suppose?" Will shook his head slightly. "Electra, it wasn't sneaking around. I was trying to plan commodity special for you." Electra raised an eyebrow distrustfully. "That's accessible," she said. Will took a deep breath. "It's the verity. I wanted to surprise you with a big design launch, your own fashion line debut. Dylan was helping me connect with some investors and hairstylists who could make it be." Electra goggled at him, recycling the information. The idea sounded inconceivable, nearly too good to be real. But the embarrassment from earlier still clouded her judgment. "You anticipate me to believe that?" she asked still. "After weeks of secretiveness?" Will jounced. "Yes. Because that secretiveness was supposed to lead to commodity amazing for you." Electra turned down, floundering with clashing feelings. Part of her wanted to believe him fully. Another part remained protective, unintentional to admit that her wrathfulness might have caused gratuitous damage. Back in the main design area, Dylan gathered her bag, preparing to leave for the day before than planned. The atmosphere around her felt uncomfortable, and she had no interest in staying while everyone goggled. Just as she reached the elevator, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Steffi Forrester approaching with curiosity written across her face. "I heard commodity happened upstairs," Steffi said precisely. Dylan let out a tired laugh. "That's one way to put it." Steffi studied her impertinence, noticing the faint greenishness. "Did Electra do that?" Dylan didn't answer incontinently, but the silence was evidence enough. Steffi lowered. "That's not okay," she said forcefully. Dylan signed slightly. It was an emotional moment. I guess effects got out of control. Steffi crossed her arms, easily concerned about the growing pressure within the company family. Electra's passionate, but she can't just go around slighting people, she said. Dylan jounced sluggishly. I know. But actually, I suppose she's more hurt than angry. Steffi lifted her head courteously. Perhaps. But hurt people can still beget a lot of damage. Latterly that evening, Electra eventually left the office as well. The evening painted the sky in tones of orange and pink, but she slightly noticed. Her studies were still tangled in the events of the day. As she walked toward her auto, she saw Dylan standing near the parking area. For a brief moment, both women sat, doubtful whether to speak or simply walk down. Dylan was the first to break the silence. Feeling better now? She asked, not sarcastically but with genuine curiosity. Electra dithered before answering. I'm allowing, she admitted. Dylan jounced. Good. Because you might want to suppose about how effects looked from my side too. Electra looked down compactly, also back over again. I shouldn't have hit you, Electra said still. The admission surprised indeed herself. Dylan's expression softened slightly. No, you shouldn't have, she agreed. But I understand why you were worried. Electra exhaled sluggishly. Still I let my wrathfulness take over. Dylan gave a small mime. It happens in this city further than people admit. For a moment, the hostility between them sounded to fade. Yet the pressure hadn't fully faded. Trust formally damaged is no way incontinently repaired. Electra looked at Dylan precisely and said, but my warning still stands. Dylan raised an eyebrow. The 4 words. Electra jounced. Stay down from Will. Dylan soughed, shaking her head slightly. Electra, I'm not interested in taking him from you. But if you keep treating people like adversaries, you might end up pushing him down yourself. The statement hung in the air between them, honest and uncomfortable. Electra didn't respond right down. Rather, she watched Dylan walk to her auto and drive down. The evening suddenly felt quieter than ahead. For the first time all day, Electra allowed herself to wonder whether this conflict had revealed commodity deeper, not about Dylan, but about her own fears. Because in the changeable world of the bold and the beautiful, love is important, covetousness is dangerous, and occasionally the biggest battles aren't between rivals, they're inside the heart of the person who spoke those 4 indelible words. Electra arrived earlier than usual that morning. She hoped that by getting to the office before utmost people, she could avoid the curious gapes and quiet whispers she knew would follow her. But the verity was that avoiding the situation entirely wasn't possible. The moment she stepped into the main lobby, she tasted the subtle shift in the room. Exchanges lowered. Many sidekicks glanced at her ahead snappily looking down. Others pretended to concentrate intensively on their phones or paperwork. Electra walked confidently toward the elevator, refusing to show any sign that the attention bothered her. On the outside she looked calm and composed, but inside her studies were still tangled. She had spent utmost of the night replaying the events of the former day. The poke. Dylan's shocked expression. Will's attempt to explain. And, of course, those 4 words she had spoken so forcefully, stay down from Will. At the time, they had felt necessary, like drawing a clear boundary. But now Electra wasn't sure whether they had defended her relationship or exposed her precariousness. Meanwhile, Dylan entered the structure through a different entrance, carrying a mug of coffee and trying to prepare herself for another uncomfortable day. She had considered taking time off, but eventually decided that fading would only make the rumors worse. However, she wanted to show that she wasn't bullied by the situation, if anything. When Dylan stepped into the design plant, several associates saluted her cautiously. Many asked if she was okay. She assured them she was fine, though the faint bruise on her impertinence was still visible if someone looked nearly enough. She set her bag down and began organizing fabrics and sketches on the large work table, determined to concentrate on her work rather of the drama girding her. Across the structure, Will Spencer was formally in his office, gaping at the megacity skyline through the window. The former day had left him emotionally exhausted. What was supposed to be a beautiful surprise for Electra had turned into a public conflict that now hovered to divide people who all worked together. He rubbed his tabernacles, wondering how everything had entwined so snappily. A soft knock intruded his studies. "Come in," he called. The door opened, and Electra stepped outside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried the weight of everything that had happened. "I figured we should talk," Electra eventually said. Will jounced sluggishly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Electra walked further into the room and sat down in the president across from his office. She looked thoughtful rather than angry now, which gave Will a small sense of relief. "I didn't sleep important last night," she admitted. "Me neither," Will replied. Electra looked down compactly before meeting his eyes again. "You said you were planning commodity for me, a launch for my own fashion line." Will jounced. "Yes. I've been working on it for weeks. Why didn't you just tell me?" Will leaned back slightly. "Because it was supposed to be a surprise. Commodity huge. Investors, press, the whole assiduity paying attention to your debut." He broke. "I wanted it to be the moment that proves you're further than just a member of the Forrester family." Electra heeded precisely. For the first time, she could truly see the trouble he'd been putting into the plan. The idea touched her more deeply than she anticipated. "You really believe in me that much?" she asked still. Will smiled slightly. "Of course I do." Electra looked down, easily emotional. "Also, I guess I owe Dylan further than just an reason." Will didn't incontinently respond, but his expression showed he agreed. At that same moment, Dylan was in the design room agitating fabric samples with another developer when Steffi Forrester entered. Steffi's sharp eyes incontinently scrutinized the room, snappily noticing Dylan.